video is going to be all about, I think, the most important thing when it comes to the golf swing, and it is your alignment. Now, I'm going to give you some simple tips that you can transfer onto the golf course to make sure you're aligned correctly. And I'm sure those of you that have had golf lessons or that play in a group of golfers, you probably know that you have tendencies not to aim at the target. And that's a really common thing, whether it's a professional or a high-level golfer or a beginner. But we need to make sure that you kind of don't keep getting into those bad habits, and these tips will really help you out. First tip, and we tend to see this a lot with professional golfers, we tend to see them go through a bit of a routine where they'll have a little bit of a sort of waggle of the golf club and maybe have a little chat to the caddy, and they're just sort of trying to formulate a bit of an idea of the shot that they're going to try and execute. But quite often then what you'll tend to see is the golfer will stand behind the golf ball and they'll sort of tilt the club like so. And what they're doing when they tilt the club like so is they're essentially just drawing a line through the ball and through their intended target. And what this does then, this gives you the ability with this straight line to choose something that is matched up to both the ball and the target line with inside your peripheral vision. Now, it might be a bit of different colour grass, it might be, I don't know, a bare spot on the ground, it could be anything, but something that is significant enough that you'll remember where it is. And the first thing you do is you just make sure that your club face is aligned towards that dot. And as long as your club face is aligned up, then you can try and match your feet up to be parallel to that, have a little look, and you'll probably find short term that you now feel like you're aiming 20, 30 yards to the left or 20, 30 yards to the right. And that'll be quite a hard thing to change. But it's important. It's important that you start matching up that alignment, because if you can get into a solid routine, yes, you might have that initial shock, but eventually you'll get very much accustomed to the fact that that is the normality. So the second one I'm less of a fan of, but I do introduce it to some levels of golfers. I introduce it to the level of golfers that are probably quite new to the game. And what you essentially do with this sort of exercise is you get set up to the golf ball, and what you do is you sort of hover the club right above my toe line. So from my eye perspective, I can now hover this club over my toe line so I can see where my feet are aiming, and I can also do it reference to the target line as well. The main reason why I'm not a massive fan of this is because I feel like it gets rid of that flow. I like to see quite a speedy pre-shot routine, something that I know golfers are generally going to commit to. And I kind of feel like this slows you down a bit, but like I stated at the beginning of the lesson, you're better off having a methodical, consistent alignment than, you know, a quick pre-shot routine with poor alignment. So I just feel like, again, if I've got a golfer who is struggling for whatever reason to be able to even do this sort of exercise and they can't see it, you have to in golf be swinging in straight lines. You have to get the club face set up towards your intended target and your feet sort of parallel, which will bring us on to my last little point in a moment, like so. And that's why I think that is an option, a very methodical one, but it's an option nevertheless. I think you can grow in confidence having some sort of familiarity, and it's something you can do much quicker as time goes on. Without it, I'm going to be lost. So I think it's a simple point, which brings us on to tip number 3. So the last little point when it comes to alignment is to understand that for a potentially more experienced golfer, that it's also acceptable to aim slightly open towards your target. Now, the reason for this is that what happens in golf is as you sort of enhance your technique, you learn either through education or just on your own through sheer practice that you can strike the golf ball better by getting your chest over the golf ball and getting your hands further forward. Now, by doing this, it basically means that you're starting to learn how to really kind of strike down on the golf ball and hit through the ball. And it means that your sort of low point in terms of where the club is striking down on the back of the golf ball is post-impact. Now, a good sort of analogy with this is kind of probably a scenario where we're more kind of familiar with is if you've got to hit the golf ball out of, say, the trees or underneath a branch. And what you tend to do when doing this sort of technique is you tend to do things like move the ball back in the stance and introduce a little bit of shaft lean. Now, by doing both of those things, what that's doing is that's again doing the same thing. It means that you're going to be striking down the golf ball with a steeper angle of attack. But what happens when we do that is that we are basically changing that low point, and it also affects our club path. So if I sort of stood here as a rough sort of example and I sort of swung the club back, we're familiar with seeing the club head work on an arc like so. But all of a sudden, if we do things like introduce shaft lean and move the ball further back, when we actually collide with the golf ball and swing through, the club head is actually more vulnerable for a right-handed golfer of continuing to move to the right of the target. So that's absolutely fine. But therefore, if we aim parallel, with our analogy out of the trees, so if I aim parallel and introduce shuffling, what will happen is that the ball will slightly miss to the right and you'll clunk the tree. So what you probably do on a subconscious level is you open up your feet. And what that does is that gives you the ability to still strike down on the golf ball, but hit it straight, which is, like I said, that's why it's not uncommon for a better golfer, somebody who strikes down on the golf ball, to not actually aim the feet completely parallel towards a target, but actually to aim their feet slightly open to the target. And the reason for that is it's because your low point and angle of attack is past the ball, so that basically means that it helps you hit the golf ball much straighter. So those are 3 tips. I think the first 2 are very much sort of entry-level basics of how to make sure you're aligned parallel. But as the game becomes more evolved and you become more experienced, I think for better golfers, understanding that you don't have to aim parallel, and that probably feels quite uncomfortable for you doing so, actually knowing that you can aim slightly left, or for a right-handed golfer, should hopefully liberate a few of you as well. Catch you with you soon.